Hey everyone, and welcome to this new installment of Gimme 10. And this week we're going to delve into the world of Detroit Techno, which is a genre that I personally find fascinating from the historical point of view to the various musical styles that evolved from it. And I would consider this to be a primer if you've never heard or gone into Detroit Techno. Maybe this could be a good video to to find 10 kind of like founding or essential records. I'm by no means an expert. I have read lots of articles and books and things on the subject. I want to mention this edition of Wax Poetics, which is great. The record players, which got interviews with quite a few of the main players of Detroit Techno. Modulations, which is really quite a useful resource. So, I come with a backlog of, ideas that I've gathered also from literature. Detroit Techno started obviously in Detroit in the early 1980s, and it was started originally by a group of three young black guys, which have come to be known as the Belleville Three. Belleville being an area of Detroit, mostly white and sort of middle class. And those three guys, Juan Atkins, Derek May, and Kevin Saunderson, the three of them bonded over their love of music, very much influenced also by the music played on Detroit radio by a DJ called Electrifying Mojo, which had a show called the Midnight Funk Association, and this was a very influential part of their that informed their musical paths, because this guy was basically a very non-conventional DJ. He would play, Prince, funkadelic, lots of European electronic music. He had a very broad base of taste, and he would mix this every night. And for example, when Computer World by Kraftwerk came out, he would play the whole album from back to front. Very, very influential to these three guys. Detroit Techno, the main source of influences come from three different spots. The first one is European electronic music, obviously bands like Kraftwerk, DEF, the Human League, the Depeche Mode, and obviously the Yellow Magic Orchestra from Japan, but in a similar vein. Second influence obviously is US 70s funk soul, Parliament Funkadelic, obviously Prince, and other more obscure bands. But with Parliament Funkadelic, it's the keyboards work of obviously Bernie Worrell, very, very formative in many ways. And the third source is Chicago House, which was running concurrently to Detroit Techno. And, the influence of Ron Hardy, for example, and Frankie Knuckles, how, there was this kind of cross-pollination. Even Derek May sold Frankie Knuckles an 808, I think, or something like that. And Derek May had hits that were both Detroit Techno and Chicago House. That shows that they would influence each other massively. So these three guys, so you've got Juan Atkins, and I want to talk about Juan Atkins for a minute. So he was a young black man who was obsessed with music. Obviously, the Midnight Funk Association was a big part of his life. He was a bass player, so he was always walking with a bass slung around his neck. And because of his fascination for bands like Kraftwerk, he talked his grandmother to buying a Korg, I think it's a Korg NS10 at the time, which is one of these first synths that were cheap enough to be bought by, the common man, because up to a point, synth was just really too expensive and not really affordable at all. So it was a period of time when these came on the market, and normal people could afford them. So his grandmother bought him a synth, and alone in his bedroom, he started, mucking around and coming up with demos. And he's probably the founding father of Detroit techno, in the sense that he's the first one who really got involved in putting the music out. Juan Atkins founded the label Deep Space Records and started operating under various names, Model 500 and obviously Cybertron. And this is the first record I want to talk about. This is Enter by Cybertron, released in 1983. And this is the product of Juan Atkins meeting a Vietnam vet called Rick Davis, a guy who was about 10 years older than him. And the two of them, he had gear, and the two of them started making music under this name, Cybertron. The names that come up in early Detroit techno are also influenced by the readings of Alvin Toffler, Future Shock, which Juan Atkins was obsessed with. So Cybertron is a name that emerged from that. This contains arguably three of the first big hitters of Detroit techno: Alleys of Your Mind, Enter obviously, and the amazing Cosmic Cars. And you could put Clear in that bracket. Now, when you listen to this very futuristic kind of mechanical music, you can't escape the hearing early 80s European music. You can hear some Kraftwerk in it. You can hear some DEF in it. You can hear some Yellow Magic Orchestra. Well, the first time I heard this record years ago, I really thought it was a synth pop record. And you could classify it as a synth pop record in many ways. But, it's one of these very first records that made Detroit techno what it is. Very highly recommended. Next record I want to present to you is a Derek May record. This is Innovator. It's basically a compilation of key tracks under the name Rhythm with Rhythm, Derek May and Mayday. On this you've got the absolute, they're kind of some of the most influential techno tracks. You've got Strings of Life, which was both a Chicago house and a Detroit techno hit, and Nude Photo, which also is absolutely key to the development of techno. These came out in 1987 under obviously this alias of Rhythm with Rhythm. Derek May was, even though they were good friends with Juan Atkins, he had different ideas about the medium and the music. First, he didn't want to call it techno. He thought that was a pretty pedestrian name. He wanted to call it high-tech soul. But Juan Atkins said, well, it's all based on technology. It's got to be called techno. Maybe it's a point where I should probably talk about the gear, because, after all, it is techno. And there's a whole lot of gear that is associated with techno. The Korg NS10 was obviously the synth that Juan Atkins used in the early days, but the key sort of instruments of techno include the ARP Odyssey 3, the Roland 303 and 808, which are obviously drum machines, the Sequential Pro 1 and the Yamaha DX7. These are instruments that feature very, very heavily in the early iteration of techno. The name techno was officially coined when this compilation came out in 1988. This was put out by, I think, Virgin, if I remember well. Yeah, Virgin put this out, and obviously this is a compilation that was released in the UK and puts the style Detroit techno on the global map, basically, because before that it was very much an American thing. And so this compilation gathers all the early hits, some of which I've discussed there. You got tracks by obviously, Juan Atkins. You've got tracks by Kevin Saunderson there. You've got tracks by Derek May. You've got a track by Eddie Flashing Folks, who is arguably the fourth, like the three guys, but he's also often viewed as the fourth wheel of the Detroit techno car. So this, which you can probably obtain quite easily, is a good primer. It's a fantastic collection of songs, double LP, and there's a good bit of write-up which goes through pretty much what I'm talking about at the moment. I'm not inventing anything new. That's the first wave of techno, right? So from 1981, say, to 1989, we have a techno that is informed by obviously this, European electronic music, a lot of like house music, cross-pollination. And then around the early 90s, I'd say 1989, 1990, it comes a second wave. And this is driven by two guys, Mike Banks and Jeff Mills. And these two guys form a sort of association, a kind of political, very politically minded association called Underground Resistance, or UR, often abbreviated. And they form a label, and they gather a bunch of acts under this umbrella. They are the antithesis of a commercial label. They are very sort of grassroots. They sort of want to exist of their own accord. They're often performing masked, and they've got this kind of ethos which is really DIY and really sort of militant. So Underground Resistance is a very, very important stone in the story of Detroit techno. First record in the second phase I want to talk about is this masterpiece. It's Galaxy to Galaxy. I don't know if you'll see this. And as you can see, released on UR. It was an EP put out by Mike Banks in 1992 or 93. This is, how can I describe this? The first song on this is called High Tech Jazz. There's two songs on this which I think are just so brilliant. Everybody should hear them. High Tech Jazz and Journey of the Dragons. What we've got is a very uplifting, very melodic, kind of almost, yes, High Tech Jazz is a good name. It's like a very high grade jazz fusion, like Weather Report, but turn into an electronic techno kind of tune. So what you've got is kind of acid house, progressive electronic music mixed with, it's a very rhythmic, very uplifting, incredibly complex record. Listen to Journey of the Dragons and I think you'll know what I'm talking about. It's hard to describe this music, but it's very high octane and I love this record. So I was talking about Jeff Mills, the founder of Underground Resistance, and I've not only got on CD, but I've got this on CD. Waveform Volume 1, and this is Waveform Transmissions Volume 3. I don't have the Volume 1. I've obviously listened to it. They're Jeff Mills' early the early masterpieces. And the techno there is already moved on to a very, very different phase where you've got a much more aggressive sound, a much more sort of highly rhythmic with the BPM. The BPM is going through the roof with this one. Waveform Volume 1 is probably slightly better than Volume 3, but they're kind of on the par with each other. And this is, acid house all the way, but kind of, with a very, very highly rhythmic bass. Another act associated with UR is Drexciya, and Drexciya is super important in the story of UR because the sound was so idiosyncratic, very conceptually aware. There's two guys, James Stinson and Gerald Donald, And this is a compilation of tracks recorded from roughly 1992 to 97, I think. A journey of the deep sea dweller. And Drexciya is based on the concept of the Drexian people, which are a race of underwater dwellers, sea dwellers, who are descendants of pregnant slave women thrown overboard during the journey from Africa to America during the times of slavery. And so, this race would have sort of emerged from the underwater. The music, as a result, is very hypnotic, aquatic, like nautical, kind of very highly energetic as well, and beautiful, kind of ethereal at the same time. I think, it's one of these bands that should cross over so many different genres of music. And if you like things like jazz, and if you like electronic music, and if you like, this transcends all these kind of styles of music. Act that is very close-knit with the EUR movement is Robert Hood. This is an absolutely amazing record, to Internal Empire from 1994. It's kind of more minimalist, more, as a more nocturnal kind of vibe. There's a couple of really great tracks on this, Home and Master Builder. They're really the tracks I would recommend that you listen to. Very atmospheric, and a little bit of, you've got these drony kind of sounds emerging from. It's a beautiful record. What can I say? It's difficult to describe. 1994, also vital record, is Azimuth by Kenny Larkin. And Kenny Larkin is one of these Detroit techno acts who really sought his fortunes in Europe and made a lot of his music whilst in Europe. But this record here is akin to ambient techno, more than like pure Detroit techno. You have musical soundscape which is very akin to things that were happening in England at the time, like for example FX Twin and the like, the Warp label, and this is very Warp-esque as a record. But I very, very highly recommend that you take a listen to Harmonics, which is the track C1 there. Beautiful record, Kenny Larkin. What to say? Very lush, very sort of, you can feel an urban soundscape, yeah, superb. A few more. So the next record I want to talk about is this record by Carl Craig. Another really important figure, Land Cruising from 1995. We have again a very sort of almost urban soundscape kind of a record, really sort of dark and kind of, kind of sound of the apocalypse, but in a nice way. And so Land Cruising, yeah, it's just got a be atmospheric, ambient almost kind of quality to it. I don't know which track I can recommend from this record. Look, listen to it yourself. I'm just pointing you in the right direction, and you can hear it yourself. Just two more records, and I'll be finished. The Paperclip People. So Paperclip People is the alias of Carl Craig. So that's Carl Craig as well. The Secret Tapes of Dr. Ike, which originally came out in 1996, and this is a 2012 remastered version, which sounds really great, and I would recommend very, very much so. And Paperclip People is again very much in the mold of ambient techno, very gentle, very light. It goes in all sorts of directions in a way, but I don't know, Oscillator, which is the second track there, is an absolute masterpiece, and it just gives you an idea of the sort of music that we've got here. And the last album I want to present to you, because I'm really completely running out of light, is this record here, The Other People Place. The Other People Place is basically James Stinson from Drexciya, which I've talked about just before. This album is called The Lifestyles of the Laptop Cafe. Came out on Warp in 2001. And now we've gone really full circle, where we have a down tempo album, an album that is really more akin to, you know, yes, the Warp label. It was issued on Warp, and so, you know, it fits really well next to something like Nightmares on Wax or Boards of Canada, or, you know, anything that's sort of in that kind of you know, atmospheric ambience techno down tempo. It's quite lush, it's very minimalistic. There's a couple of really lovely tracks on this. Let Me Be Me. Let Me Be Me. And also the track I would recommend on this is Moonlight Rendezvous, which are both really good illustrations of that sound. So very ethereal, very melodic, beautiful, you know, reinvention of the style. All right, I'll stop talking now. I hope you enjoyed this installment. It was not easy to put together because there's a lot of information, but if I have screwed up somewhere, please let me know in the comments. Take care.